Welcome everybody to Wednesday evening at the London Buddhist Centre online. My name is David Mitra and I'm going to be hosting this evening's class. I'll be joined later by Sthiramanas, who's going to give a talk. He's going to be speaking on sloth and torpor, two of the five hindrances. Last week apparently Amalioden gave a talk on, I don't know which two. Anyway, I beg your pardon? Craving and ill will. Good job, Stabilising is here. So this will be the second talk of three. And after that he'll lead a meditation and something along those lines. Sorry, this is my first time here doing this class. I'm not quite sure what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm sure you don't mind that. Just make allowances for a complete beginner. Good. So let me introduce Zander, who's behind the camera. Would you like to say hello or pop your head around?
Say hello.
Thank you, Zander. Okay, so let's get started. We're going to do a short meditation first of all, which will be led by me, and then I will call Sthiramanas over to give his talk, and he'll give you a correct sequence of events for those of you who are not familiar with what's going to happen. So Zander, if you could take the lights down, we'll get started with the meditation. So just settle down into your seats, whether you're sitting on a chair or on cushions on the floor. Make sure you're sitting comfortably. Making any adjustments you need to make before we start. And then to begin with, just get a sense of your body sitting on the chair, sitting on the cushions, and being aware of the sensations caused by the points of contact between your body and the chair or the cushion and the floor. So just settling into the stillness. Being aware of the contact, especially with your feet with the floor. And just allowing your awareness to travel along through your legs from the feet, through the ankles, into the knees, bring your awareness into the thighs, into the pelvic region, just feeling the stability of the whole lower part of your body. Bring your attention up through the spine, into the lower back. Becoming aware of your abdomen. And just taking note of what's going on there. Just making sure you're not holding on to your stomach, so there's no tightness there. And then bring your attention further up the spine. Feeling the chest open. If there's any tightness there, just try and relax it. And then allowing that attention, that awareness to extend into your shoulders, into the shoulder blades, making sure your shoulders are dropped down, you're not holding them up. So there's no tension there. Becoming aware of your arms, the upper arms, lower arms, wrists, and your hands. If your fingers are interlocked, well, just release them. So that the hands and the wrists are soft and relaxed. And then bring your attention upwards again, through the arms, into the shoulders, and into the neck. Feeling the head poised on top of your neck. Becoming aware of your face. Releasing any tension you find in the face. Relaxing the brow, the area around the eyes, and the mouth. Giving particular attention to the jaw. Just make sure you're not clenching your jaw. If you are, just let it go. And then just bring your attention onto the breath. Feeling the breath coming into the body and leaving the body. Becoming aware of the gentle rise and fall of the rib cage, or the gentle movement in the belly. And just relaxing into the breath, feeling it come in and feeling it go out. Trying to focus your attention more and more exclusively just on the breath. Allowing the breath to follow its natural rhythm. If your mind wanders, just bring your attention back to the breath. And now, in your own time, when you're ready, open your eyes. So now I'm going to hand over to Sthiramanas, who's going to speak to you on the theme of stabilising the mind. He's probably the best person to speak about this because his name has some sort of association with that idea, and he's going to explore this theme through the two of the hindrances, sloth and torpor. So, Sthiramanas, over to you.
Switch chairs. How's this sound? All right.
Yeah,
great. Thank you very much. So yes, hello everyone from me. I see that some people have been saying hello in the chat box. So it'd be great, Xander, maybe if you could read out a few names, just so it's always nice to put some names to the faces that I can't see but know are behind the camera.
So we've got Ulf from Sweden.
Ah, from Sweden, fantastic. Hello, Ulf.
Miriam from Donegal.
Hello, Miriam.
James from just up the road in Clapton.
Hello, James.
And Sophie from Haringey.
Hello, Sophie.
And Anne Chorley from Woodford.
Hello, Anne. Brilliant. It gives a flavour, doesn't it?
Graham from Trieste.
And Graham from Trieste. We got all that. Where's Trieste?
Italy.
Italy. Fantastic. So Italy, Sweden, Ireland, and up the road. So very warm welcome from me, and thank you very much, David Mitra, for sort of settling us down at the beginning of the evening. It's lovely to lead something with David Mitra. It's the first time him and I have done a class together, and David Mitra is a very good friend of mine, so it's really real pleasure for me. So yes, as David Mitra said, I'm going to be speaking about two of the 5 hindrances. I'm going to be speaking about sloth and torpor, which is actually one hindrance, and anxiety and restlessness, which is another. So last week, Amelie Odin was speaking about ill will and craving. And in a couple of weeks' time, there's something else happening next week, which we'll say more about in a bit. In a couple of weeks' time, I believe Dianata is going to be looking at this doubt. So the 5 hindrances, especially if you weren't here last week, they're a really helpful sort of diagnostic tool, if you like, it's a means by which you can diagnose some of the things that are keeping you from being able to meditate very successfully, or feel like they're getting in the way of you getting concentrated, certainly. So when we do something like we just did then, where we sit and watch the breath, if you're anything like me, what you'll notice is that there's various distractions of some sort. You might find that you're thinking about what you want to do later. You might be rehearsing an argument in your head. You might be falling asleep. You might be really worried about something, or you might be sitting there thinking, what's the point? And there, in a sense, they would all be manifestations of the different ones of the 5 hindrances. So it could be easy to sort of over-focus on them, and we sort of problematize, it's a bit like a sort of a doctor's diagnosis in a way. It's helpful to know what's going wrong so that you can try and do something about it and come back to full health, which in this metaphor would be concentration. And it's easy to become a bit of a hypochondriac if you spend too much time thinking about them. So in a way, like spending a whole class sort of focusing on the hindrances isn't necessarily sort of helpful. So I'll try and put them in. I'll try and sort of help you sort of to notice them, and then be able just to sort of log that, know how to deal with it as it comes, and then focus on the main matter of meditation, which is trying to look more towards the positive of what's going on, trying to find pleasure in the breath, trying to sort of get involved with something positive rather than getting worried about what's going wrong, which I can really recognise as a possibility. So just like last week, Amelie Odin was looking at craving and ill will as they're they're sort of opposites. They sort of play together, if you like. But if cravings like wanting things, then ill will or aversion is like sort of pushing them away. So there are objects sort of out there in our experience or in our imagined experience. We either want them here or we want them to go away. So just like that's a sort of a pair, so what I'm going to be talking about tonight is also a pair. So you've got sloth and torpor, and restlessness and anxiety. So actually 4 different words there. I'll kind of go one by one. So just to give a brief outline of what they are, and then I'll go into them in a bit more detail. So sloth and torpor. So sloth is a physical experience of sort of tiredness, sluggishness, heaviness, and torpor is the mental equivalent of that. So a sort of dull, heavy, unresponsive mind. So that's sloth and torpor. They're, again, the physical and mental aspects of this kind of heavy deadness that we might experience in meditation. Sometimes we're sort of going to sleep in meditation. Sometimes you're just sort of sitting there going... and restlessness and anxiety is, in a sense, its opposite, in that restlessness is the physical experience of not being able to quite sit still, fidgeting, being a bit bothered, a bit uncomfortable, wanting to get up and do something else. And anxiety is, of course, the related mental experience of that, of not quite being able to settle because there's so many things that you need to do or think about or solve or whatever. I'm sure we've all had our own experience of anxiety in that sense. So in a way, this pair is to do with our energy, for want of a better word. It's like where our energy is going. Is it sort of sinking down into the kind of mud of sleepy dullness, or is it kind of sort of bouncing up and flitting around into unsettled, restless worry? So ideally, neither. Ideally, we're somewhere in the middle, or even above, in a way. I'll get more onto that at the end. We're not aiming to just get to a sort of a neat midpoint. We're aiming to transcend the whole issue. I'll come to that at the end. So maybe I could sort of say a little bit about each. Just because if we notice that they're in our experience, it's good to know, A, how to diagnose it, and then B, how to cure it, if you like. So first of all, we need to know how to spot that that's what's going on, and then we need to know what to do. So so in terms of spotting it, to diagnose it, if you like, it's sort of with sloth and torpor. For me, yeah, certainly if you're falling asleep, that could be related. It might just be that you're really overtired and you've not been sleeping enough, which of course can be remedied by sleeping better. So we start to see all the different things that feed into how our meditation practice actually goes, that sort of are from the rest of our life outside. Might be that you're not sleeping enough, but often there's no real reason why you should be so tired. And it might be to do with some sort of resistance or some sort of internal conflict that's taking up the energy and making you sort of want to just like shrink away from experience. Just find yourself just really tired for some reason you can't explain. So that might be noticed in meditation. I think it's sort of like being in teenager mode. It's this sort of this thing of just like really just wanting to just sit on the sofa and just not have anything to do with anything. Thank you very much. And there's a traditional image right from back when the Buddha was teaching, there's different sort of analogies of water, or like ponds, with the ideal of a concentrated mind being like pure, still, clear water. Sloth and torpor is like water that's completely sort of clogged up with sort of weeds and undergrowth. So it's just like completely dense with sort of like dirty, dank kind of pond life. So in a sense, what I'm trying to do here is just to sort of conjure up a bit of a sense of what that's like, so that we can spot it for ourselves. And what we might then do about that. What do we do about that if we notice that? So you could either, if it's something that's quite extreme, you might need to sort of, you might need to notice that you are overtired and you need to be sleeping more. You might notice if it's a particular tendency for you to be like this when you're meditating. You might want to adjust the space or the way that you're meditating. So one thing you could do is you could meditate in a room that's a bit brighter. So if you're always meditating in a really dark room, but you're always feeling like you're going to sleep, you could just turn the lights up a bit. You could meditate outside if it's warm enough. You've got this sort of air on your face. You're trying to sort of give yourself a little bit more your senses a little bit more stimulation. So you're going into meditation a bit more like sort of going to grab it by the horns and have a go. You might splash water on your face before you do it, something like that. So you're just trying to kind of, it's a bit like if you've got the teenager, if you've got the sort of teenager mind that's just wanting to slump on the sofa. With a teenager, you don't want to sort of go softly and treat them really gently and say, do you want to do the dishes or whatever. It's like you need to, at some point, you need to just like shake them. There's something that needs to just be like, you just need to like get sort of some sort of a defibrillator kind of shock and just like get some life in there. So you might want to do you might want to approach it a little bit like that and be a bit sort of like, just sort of find out some way to sort of G yourself into it. Is one way. And I'll say once I've talked about restlessness and anxiety, I might talk a little bit about a different way of relating to the hindrances, but that would be a sort of more direct sort of cure to this issue. So yeah, hopefully that's given a bit of a sense of what sloth and torpor would be like. Maybe some of you recognise this, I know that I do. And a bit of a sort of an approach that might sort of just wake you up out of it. So that's in a way if you notice it in your meditation, that can be the next effort that you apply in meditation can be to do. And then, so then restlessness and anxiety is in many ways sort of quite opposite. So the restlessness and anxiety, it's sort of like a sort of skittish child, like a toddler or something that's eaten too many M&Ms and is sort of bouncing off the walls. The energy is a bit like, you might not even you might not feel like joyous and bouncy, but your mind might be sort of skittering around, not quite being able to settle on anything. I sort of noticed this particularly. You spend a lot of time on doing emails or whatever, or you're checking emails and checking your phone and someone comes in and and your mind is just got into this mode of just being bounced around from one thing to the next. And if you spend a long period of time in that, say you have a busy day, and you spend a whole day sort of in that mode, this is me reporting my experience just now, partly, then sitting down to meditate, you'll just notice that your mind just keeps sort of cycling through in the same mode, the things that, I have forgotten to do that. Bit like a sort of child that can't just like sit still and do something. The water analogy for this is like a pond that's being sort of blown around by winds. So that all the surface just won't stay still. It's sort of just being sort of choppy waters. And so the antidote for that, the cure for that, if you like, is quite different. So I often notice if I'm feeling particularly anxious in meditation, or if I can't sit still, I might need to settle down much more. It's a bit like if you've got this toddler with loads of sugar and you're trying to get them, who's eaten loads of sugar, and you're trying to get them to go to bed, shouting at them or keeping your voice really loud, whatever, is probably not going to help. The attitude probably needs to be one more of just like calming down and turning the lights down, which you might do in your room. If you're feeling like this, you might want to lower the lights, create a calmer atmosphere. You might even, if you're sort of speaking to yourself in meditation, telling yourself how to approach it, you might even adapt that similar tone to sort of just calm things down and just settle. Partly because the experience of anxiety is quite unpleasant. If you really stop and look at it in meditation, if you have the courage, if you like, to really look at what that's like, this experience of not being able to settle, actually it's quite sort of painful. And so in order to just like settle down and kind of look at that, it requires a certain kind of softness, or a certain kind of bringing a certain amount of ease into the situation. So just trying to calm down, bring the lights down, and you might bring your awareness sort of lower into the body, just as you might do the opposite for sloth and torpor. Bring your awareness lower into the body and just sort of settle. So that's a bit of what both of the hindrances are like. So you might be able to spot them, and we'll probably always, most of the time, somewhere on that spectrum, if you like, from sloth and torpor to restlessness and anxiety. And you also might find that you sort of bounce between the two. For a while, I was thinking, do I get more into sloth and torpor or more into restlessness and anxiety? Like, which is my tendency? I felt like I must have a sort of particular type that was drawn to one rather than the other. And I think actually I spent quite a lot of time in both, and often sort of as a reaction to one another. It's like that you have a really busy day, it's really stressful, you spend the whole day feeling really anxious, and you get home and you turn on Netflix and you just sort of zone out. And you just go straight from anxiety into torpor, or you just sort of like completely sort of dull out. So they can sort of be a reaction to one another. So what we're trying to do is to sort of to rise above the whole thing. We're not just trying to sort of counter one with the other. We're trying to recognize what's going on and sort of rise above it, if you like. So another approach, an approach that I personally sort of prefer in meditation, sometimes if it's really extreme, you might need to apply some of those cures that I suggested. But approach I sort of prefer is to kind of just to really become aware of the hindrance, not necessarily trying to change it straight away, just becoming really aware of it. And in the very where this turns up in the very early Buddhist texts, it sort of lists saying, I can't quote it exactly, so excuse my paraphrasing, but noticing the presence of sense desire, and then noticing the presence of this. This is just how it works. You're just sitting in meditation and you just notice, there's a hindrance. You might label it and be like, that's sloth and torpor. That can be quite helpful to be like, that's just what's going on. I know what that is. And rather than worrying about it, just being able to be like, what's that like? That's part of your meditation. In the meditation, you're trying to become more and more aware of your experience, and that's part of it. So what's that like? What does it actually feel like to be in this experience of sloth and torpor? And in doing so, we sort of zoom out. So the tendency of the hindrance is that it sort of becomes it takes over your whole vision, if you like. So if you're feeling anxious, the world's a very worrying place. There's no way of looking at your life that isn't really awful. Or really sort of worrying in some way. It's very difficult to sort of step out of that. But by really seeing very frankly that that's what's going on, that you're in this state, you've got a term for it, it's just restlessness and anxiety. It's just something that is very natural, very normal. It's something it sort of flows through us all. Sometimes we might be experiencing that, sometimes we might be experiencing sloth and torpor or something else. But it's just part of human experience. It flows through, and you have the choice of how you respond to it. And one way to respond to it is just to really notice it, experience it quite fully, and in doing so, it stops becoming the sort of whole of your experience, because it's almost as if there's sort of something else looking in on that. Your consciousness expands in order to look at the experience of anxiety as a sort of object in itself. And in doing so, we're sort of zooming back away from the picture, and if you like, sort of above the picture of which this hindrance is only a part. I hope that makes some sense, but rather than trying to sort of like cut it off or fix it or pretend it's not happening, we're just going like, right, anxiety, interesting. What's that like? And in doing so, sort of zooming out. And yes, and that and where that might take us, I won't say very much about this, but where that might take us is more than just the absence of either. Or rather, the absence of either of these hindrances would lead to much more than a sort of steady energy in the middle. Your mind stabilised in this way, not veering into sloth and torpor or into restlessness and anxiety, is much more likely to be able to open up. And I was thinking about in meditation this morning and the image that comes to mind is of the archetypal Buddha Akshobhya, and I'll sort of finish off what I'm going to say just by sort of if you like, painting a picture of Akshobhya and how he might represent something of this state of mind that is truly steady and unaffected by either of these pulls. I think I thought of this because Akshobhya is related to water, and we've got these pond analogies. And I like to think of Akshobhya as sort of on water. He sits on a lotus, and you can imagine that lotus on water. But rather than any body of water that you've seen before, it's a body of water that is completely still, like scarily still. No effect of wind, no effect of any disturbance whatsoever, and perfectly clear, almost like glass. And the Akshobhya is a deep blue colour, so a deep sort of rich blue. And with his right hand, he just touches the ground like this. I can't reach the ground because I'm on a chair, but if this is the ground, he sort of touches the ground like so. Incredibly, I won't say much about that, but incredibly sort of reassuring or like sort of strong, stable gesture. That's with his right hand, and with his left hand, he's holding a vajra, and a vajra is it's a thunderbolt. It's as powerful as a thunderbolt and as strong as a diamond, and it's a symbol for ultimate reality. So he holds reality in his hand. So by looking at our experience as it is, not trying to change it in any way, but trying to just really experience it up close, it's like we take a mirror to our experience. And Akshobhya is related to the mirror-like wisdom, the wisdom of just seeing things exactly as they are, as they're occurring. And in doing so, there's a kind of, the kind of stability, the kind of steadiness that evokes is something much, much deeper and richer than a mere absence of these two problems, if you like. So, yes, I just thought I'd sort of evoke Akshobhya as something that might transcend the sort of the midpoint between these two. So, we'll take a 5-minute break, and after that we'll come back and I'll lead us in a meditation. We'll do the mindfulness of breathing meditation, I'll remind us of what the stages of that are as we go along, and I'll say a little bit more about how we might approach what I've just been saying in the meditation before we do it. So it's now 7:44, so I'll see you at 7:49. See you in a sec. You should be able to hear me again now.
Yeah.
Great. So, yes, welcome back. So we'll be doing a bit of meditation, as I said. We'll do the mindfulness of breathing practice. And what I just encourage you to do is just to particularly bring awareness to this, the quality of your energy in the meditation, what I've been talking about. Without necessarily looking for problems, just see, like, where am I? Am I sort of feeling like, am I sort of sinking down, or am I sort of flitting off somewhere? And just sort of investigate your experience of that. And it might be changing. It might be one moment in the meditation and another at another. If it's really extreme, you might apply a bit of a correction to try and wake yourself up or calm yourself down. But mainly, I'd really encourage you just to take a real interest and, in a way, get closer and closer and closer and try and see the experience of that, the experience of your sort of energetic experience, if you like. I always feel a bit funny talking about energy like that. It feels like it should be very sort of new age. But trying to get sort of closer and more, seeing more and more your sort of energetic experience as it really is, experiencing it more fully. So we'll be doing that by watching the breath. The breath is a kind of a key, if you like, a doorway into our total experience. So that's what we'll be doing. So yes, I'll ask Sandra to turn down the lights. So beginning by setting yourself up. Finding a good posture that isn't rigid but isn't slumped back is really helpful with this, finding this balancing point with your energy. So, sort of confident upright position. And just letting your weight drop down. Just start by just noticing if you're holding any tension in your face. Often we're slightly squeezing our eyes. Letting your face be soft. Noticing if you're holding on in your shoulders at all. And see if you're gripping your belly. What's your experience like in the area of the belly? And expanding your awareness to fill the whole of your body. And noticing the breath as it moves through the body. the mindfulness of breathing. In the first stage, we place a count at the end of the out breath. So at the point at which the out breath ends, 1. Breathe in, breathe out. Say 2. All the way to 10. And then starting again at 1. Helping us keep track of the breath. If your mind goes off, just watching again for right at the end of the out breath, that experience of letting go, and starting again at 1. The second stage, just shifting the count to the very beginning of the in-breath. So we breathe out, and as we start to breathe in, 1, in, out. As we start to breathe in, 2. Trying to bring your awareness right to the point where the breath starts to come in. That moment of lift. In the third stage, we let go of any counting and just watch the whole of the breath and the whole of the body. As you follow the breath, drawing your awareness closer and closer to what your experience is really like. Whether you're feeling heavy or skittish and distracted, what's that like? It may even be very subtle. final stage, drawing your awareness to the place at which the breath first enters and leaves the body. That first subtle experience of the breath, perhaps at the tip of your nose or on your upper lip. As you tune into that increasingly subtle sensation, seeing if you can find a kind of poise and balance just around that point. And now letting go of any effort that you're making in the meditation, you can allow your awareness to expand back out from that point. And just sit for a while longer, absorbing your experience, absorbing the meditation. So opening your eyes when you're ready. I'm going to invite Deva Mitra to come and join me. Maybe I'll move this so we can sit right next to each other. Deva Mitra and I live together. We're from the same household, so we can sit right by one another. How's that, Xander?
That's very good.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Great.
Well, Sthiramanas, thank you for that very evocative exposition of these two hindrances, sloth and torpor and restlessness and anxiety, the one I forgot to mention, and what it might feel like to transcend that polarity. I gather we've already got questions coming through on the chat line. If you have any questions that you've not put there, please do so, and then Sthiramanas will oblige us by answering them. So I'm going to now call on Xander again to ask the first question on someone's behalf.
So we have a question from Mercia, which is the goal of meditation to stabilize the mind, or is stability a sort of happy byproduct of awareness?
Luckily I've got Deva Mitra here to help me. I guess it could probably be both in a sense. Like I like a saying of Bhante, my teacher Sangharakshita, who says that the object of meditation is not to have good meditations, but to transform yourself. The having a more stable mind is would be a form of transforming yourself as well. It would be a means to sort of to get things moving along the same tracks, if you like, to sort of bring things more together and moving on the same tracks. It's a helpful sort of basis for more transformation. If we're scattered and we're doing one thing here and one thing there, and we allow that to carry on when we meditate, or worse, we just don't meditate, then our life will sort of continue in that vein. It's very difficult to kind of really move towards any goal. So in a way, it's a sort of necessary basis. That sort of stability is a sort of necessary basis for the rest of our Buddhist practice and our progress. But you could also, there'd be a way of maybe you might say a bit more about this, because I know Deva Mitra was doing a series of talks in India last week on the 7 Bodhisangas, and the last of those 7 Bodhisangas being the how would you translate them?
Well, the limbs of enlightenment, or factors of enlightenment.
Factors of enlightenment. So a progressive series, and the last of those is upeksha, or equanimity. And equanimity might be another way, or at least is related in some way to this kind of steadiness. So it could also be, in that respect, it's related to enlightenment itself. So it could also be a way of describing the goal. Maybe you could say a bit more about that.
Well, I think that you said you sort of encapsulated it yourself at the end of your talk by evoking that image of akshobhya, because akshobhya really does represent stability at the highest possible level, the stability of enlightenment. And interestingly enough, when I gave those talks in India last week, when it came to that final stage of upeksha, I too evoked, well, not actually akshobhya, but the Buddha in the earth touching gesture, which you tried to illustrate, which you can't really sitting on a chair properly, but it just gives a sense of absolute immobility. So I think that's what we're ultimately heading for. But yes, I mean, of course there are levels of stability, and just as you were speaking, what occurred to me was that another way of looking at this is the whole process of what within Triratna we call the process of integration, psychological integration, and then integrating ourselves more and more into the high dimension of what Akshobi represents. So, the basic stability would represent the psychological integration that we need in order to make any significant progress in the Buddhist life and following the Buddhist path.
Right, yeah.
Okay, that's a question from Mercia. Thank you very much, Mercia.
Yeah, we've got one from Sophie.
Mm-hmm. Hello, Sophie.
She says, when doing the mindfulness of breathing and you notice a hindrance, do you abandon the stages and just focus on the exposition of that hindrance, as you said, or do you notice it and still try to do the stages?
I think the probably soundest advice would be to work with it within the stages, in terms of, certainly say in the mindfulness of breathing, working with the breath is there's room in there for everything else. There's room for everything else to come in there. The breath it's an anchor. It's central to our whole experience all of the time. We may not be paying particular attention to it all the time, but it's always there, as a part of our experience, and it sort of brings our experience sort of roots it in something physical, something tangible. So in a sense, I think you can kind of explore your mind very fully with that in the middle of it, and keeping that anchor can help it from going into a kind of a sort of worry or an over-interest, or easily, especially if the hindrance is anxiety. In investigating it, it's very possible to sort of get into why is that happening, and sort of anxiously thinking about anxiety, which would be self-defeating. So for something like that, it'd be really good to just kind of keep using the breath, keep coming back to that, and just experiencing it very tangibly. That said, I think there's a lot of room for creativity in meditation, particularly when you've been doing it for a while. And sometimes it might just be, I think I might do this sometimes where I realise that actually there's sort of, I don't really feel like doing that practice as it sort of sits, and actually right now I'm feeling a lot of, say, anxiety, and really I just want to sit with that and just really explore that very, very directly. So it's not to say that there's not a place for that, but I think especially depending on if you're still in the first sort of maybe year of meditation or so, I'd say really worth working with the stages. Do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I would agree entirely. I think it's important to stick with the stages as much as you can, not rigidly. Sometimes you just have to deal with whatever's before you, but that's the way I've always approached doing the practices that I engage in. Really try to stick with the structure, unless there's a very good reason not to. Either you become so distracted you've got to sort of, I don't know, have recourse to something a bit more drastic, or if you suddenly find that you're so concentrated that you've already achieved in the first stage of the mindfulness of breathing a state of intense concentration. Well, obviously you're not going to, you just forget about the rest of the stages of the practice. Just try and sustain that experience. I have to confess that I've had that experience very often. Occasionally it does happen though.
One thing I'd maybe add in terms of working with the stages that's very related to these two hindrances is the first two stages of the mindfulness of breathing are they're good counters for different hindrances, in the sense that if you pay particular attention to the end of the out breath, the experience of that's very calming. So if you find that you sit down to meditate and you're like, right, I'm pretty anxious. Often it's quite good, even before you start the stages of meditation, just to quickly take stock of what's my mind like right now. You might find you're feeling really anxious, and you might just want to spend a bit longer just doing the first stage. Or if you're just feeling really heavy and sluggish, you might want to skip past the first stage and just spend longer in the second stage, where as you start to notice the beginning of the in-breath, it's got a sort of enlivening quality. So that might help, in a way, sort of prioritising one of those two stages might help to work with where your energy is at in the meditation. So we can sort of find creative ways to work with the stages of the practice as well.
Okay, well, I think we've dealt with that pretty comprehensively. I think it's time for another question, Sander.
Another question. So the next question is another one from Mercy, actually, which is, how would you approach working with doubt?
I think, so Dhyanatta in 2 weeks' time is going to be talking about this exclusively. He's not got two hindrances. He's just got the one. So I don't want to take steal his thunder too much.
I think we better bypass that one. Come back in 2 weeks' time.
We need, that's the last of the questions we've got here, but maybe if anyone wants to send another one through, we've got time. Maybe
I think we've probably got time for one more. You were thinking of...
yes.
Yeah, you were going to ask me something as well, or have we already covered it?
Oh, let's see. I think you said we've got questions.
We've
did
not.
You say?
No. So we're waiting to see if there's anyone. If anyone else has something they really want us to hear us talk about, then do write it in. Otherwise,
we have no questions.
No.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to ask you about conflict, because you mentioned conflict as a possible source for sloth and torpor, and I think it might be worth just unpacking that a bit more.
Yeah, I think that's good. That's a good point. So this question of what's underneath sloth and torpor, in a way, this question of like what's it's like our energies are sort of congealed or sort of blocked or dammed up in some way in sloth and torpor. There's, for some reason, we're just like, especially if you've got this experience of being like, I'm really tired and I don't know why. Often there's some sort of conflict in your experience. It might be that you really want to do one thing, but you feel like you're not supposed to. All that desire, sort of moving towards this thing you want to do, and this sort of equal and opposite force to sort of hold it down. There's a lot of energy that's being sort of caught up in that. It's happening all the time. That's sort of happening all the time. I've sometimes noticed that I've sort of been feeling a bit sort of off or a bit tired. Sometimes in meditation I might notice actually I'm really bothered by my relationship with X person. I feel like I've said something that wasn't very good to them, or something about what they said something that upset me, and I realise actually I just need to go talk to them. And if I do, I might find that there's a sort of, especially if it goes well and it sort of brings us into connection again, there's like a whole release of energy. It's like, oh, suddenly I'm not really tired. I've got loads of energy. And actually communication and good, clear, honest communication between you and particularly the other people who are sort of quite central in your life, that can create a lot, that can sort of release a lot of energy that you might not know was being sort of caught up. So it might be caught up in a sort of lack of contact, lack of communication, or in some sort of more internal conflict with yourself over indecision, or this might be something to do with doubt as well. Maybe that's a hint. But all sorts, like, and you could talk about that. We could talk about that for a lot longer in a way, but there might be something underneath it. Yeah. Is there anything you had?
No, not really. Well, we're running out of time. Actually, I'm very conscious of that. So. We'll leave that for Dhyanatta. But it's almost time to finish. But before we do so, I have 1 or 2 things that I need to say. First of all, of course, thank you for coming along. It's nice to see you here. Next week, we're going to have a special evening. So there'll be a hiatus between the continuation of these talks on the hindrances. Next week, we're going to be celebrating the anniversary, the 64th anniversary actually, of Dr. Ambedkar's conversion to Buddhism in India. Now, some of you won't know who on earth this man is, but he truly is one of the greatest figures, I would say, of the last century. And he's been responsible for initiating, through his own conversion, a huge movement of mass conversion amongst those people who in India were born as untouchables, outside the caste system. They've had a whole millennia of treatment, which it beggars belief, really. I'm not going to go into all that now, but Ambedkar was of that background himself and rose to become the first law minister of independent India, and pretty much single-handedly formulated the Indian constitution after independence. So he's quite an outstanding figure from the last century who's hardly known in the West. We've heard a lot about Gandhi. We've heard very little about Ambedkar. But there were two huge figures in Indian recent history. And I think Ambedkar needs to be better known in the West. We have our own particular connection with Dr. Ambedkar because the founder of the Triratna movement spent many years in India helping people who were the followers of Dr. Ambedkar to put Buddhism into practice, and we've continued with that process. So next week, as part of the celebration, there's going to be a sort of panel discussion, and I've just heard I'm going to be part of that, so I'll be back next week to explore his significance more fully for you. So I hope you'll come along for that. The only other thing that remains to be said is, of course, as always, we are very dependent upon your generosity. Everything that we do here at the centre, we do on the basis of generosity. We do it because we love doing it. I'm only sitting here because I love teaching the Dharma. I don't get enough teaching opportunities at the London Buddhist Centre as far as I'm concerned. But I'm very grateful for the few that come my way. But anyway, we all do it because we love doing it. We don't do it for money. We don't get any money. I certainly don't get any money. So I haven't been paid a sou all the time I've been associated with this place. But please, if you can, give. I imagine that Xander's putting a relevant link in the chat line. So if you just go follow that link and make a donation, we will be very, very happy. That's all for this evening. Thank you very much. Have a pleasant evening for the rest of the evening, or wherever you are, late midnight if what's his name, Marjit, say in India, whatever the time date is in Mexico. Yeah. Okay, sadhu. Okay, good night, everybody.
Good night from me.
Yeah. Excellent.